are a series of pyramids. They're tetrahedral shaped, which if you ever follow Hoagland stuff, you'll get that why that's important. They're tetrahedral pyramids on Mars. See, this is an edge here, this is an edge here. Two of them are in a row. There's tetrahedral pyramids on Mars. This was from Mariner, so it's really, really primitive imagery. And then there's other pyramids in Elysium. This is another pyramid that was photographed on Mars. This end is partially buried, but you can see that it's basically very similar to this Chinese pyramid. And if you overlay them, which should have come up, they're exactly the same. You can see how, well, again, it's a little bit too much glare here, but this side here is kind of sagging in a little bit. Same thing with the Chinese pyramid. That's what happens with artificial structures. They will sag. What, did I need to do something different?
I was just wondering, is that cursor too small for people in the room to see? Because the people at home aren't going to get any of this.
Okay. Can you, so like this, okay, let's do it that way. So, you know, if you see they overlay perfectly in shape. The Chinese pyramid is artificial. The one on Mars, they will tell you, is not artificial. But how can that not be the same thing when it looks exactly the same? And what I want everybody to say is, to understand is, trust your eyes. Do not believe what the experts tell you, because a lot of them are liars, and the ones that aren't lying to you are just dumb, and they don't want to accept the fact that there was once a civilization on Mars. So these kinds of things really intrigue me. If you can see, again, there's sagging patterns, so if you overlay them, they are basically exactly the same thing, and you cannot have a natural formation like this in isolation. You can have pyramidal-shaped mountains, but they're always part of a mountain chain. This thing is like the other tetrahedral pyramids that Sagan found, is in Elysium. It's all by itself. It's sitting in the middle of pretty much nothing. And that is, again, a really strong indication that this might be artificial. So, again, here's some other pyramidal shapes. The one on the left is from Viking. This is the same one photographed years later by a global surveyor. And again, you can see these sharp, faceted edges. Here's the center. And again, it's a three-sided or four-sided tetrahedral pyramid that's partially buried, just like the ones that Sagan found. This is closer to Cydonia, where the face on Mars and some of the other objects are. So this stuff is all over Mars. All you have to do is look. Excuse me. Yeah?
I have seen some pictures that were acquired from Japan. There was allegedly a contract between NASA and Japan to give them a copy of every photo they have, but Japan is not as tight-lipped.
Well, it's the Cayuga probe, which is taking a lot of pictures. I got into that in the Moon book a little bit. Their pictures are a little bit censored. They're still censored. I mean, there's stuff that you can see in the photographic prints from NASA from the 60s that you look in the same area and gosh, it's not there in the digital image. Or you zoom up on it and it's nothing but pixels. Like you zoom up and you can't see any detail when you should be able to see the shoelaces on somebody's shoes if they were standing there. So there's other pyramidal objects on Mars. This is one from Cydonia. This is actually at the base of a pyramid in the so-called city area. It's kind of got a shape. I recreated this in a CAD program to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. Understand it's partially buried. This stuff is in ruins. It's been there for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. This is the D&M pyramid on Mars. This is a 3D image constructed from two stereo images by the European Space Agency. And, you know, again, the one side over here to the left is a little bit washed out, but you can see clearly that there's faceted pyramidal edges to this thing. This is a five-sided pyramid. Five-sided pyramid that has two axes of symmetry. If you look at it and measure the points, the end points, it's symmetrical about one axis and a second axis as well, which, again, completely impossible if it's a natural object. This is the Inca city on Mars on the left. These are some ruins in Iraq on the right. Again, very, very similar. You see the right-angled walls. You see these kinds of, anytime you see this right-angled stuff where you have these kinds of edges, that's generally artificial. There are arguments that it will be natural, but only over really very small distances do you get this kind of fracturing. And again, if it looks like ruins on Earth and it looks exactly the same on Mars, and the odds are it's the same thing.
It's which city?
This is called the Inca city on the left. It's called the Inca city on Mars. And you can look that up online. There's a lot of stuff on it. And you could also buy Ancient Aliens on Mars. There's all kinds of stuff. If you look at Mars, there's stuff from far away, from medium range, and from close up. You see artificial stuff. You see faces. You see pyramids. You see junk. This is a mechanical device. This is just off the lip of the Pathfinder lander from 1997. And by the way, this is the best image that NASA can give you of this, okay? It's absolute crap, but you can still see that there is a kind of a boxy shape to it. It's beat up and battered. And then inside there's this. Look at these little spokes that are all regularly spaced here. Again, doesn't happen in nature. That's some kind of flywheel that was inside of a metal casing that's now frozen solid, but it was sitting right next to Pathfinder. And it's really funny because if you look at the Pathfinder TV images that came back, like NASA started broadcasting live from Mars, this is way back in '97 when Pathfinder landed, they do not match up with the pictures that were later posted on the web. All this really interesting stuff suddenly just isn't there anymore, but this was taken from a TV shot, an actual TV shot. Here it is, just off the edge, and just to show you what goes on, you can see that this is the image I just showed you, and here's the Pathfinder platform right here. And then, can you guys see this? I don't know if you can see this, but yeah, you can see all this digital artifacting right here? When they posted this picture later on the web, see, this is TV. Whoops. This on the left is TV. This on the right is what they posted on the web. They just wallpapered right over it, so you couldn't see that there was anything weird about that particular rock. So again, this is kind of an example of the flywheel. And there was stuff on the Pathfinder landing site. This is an object that I think is a sphinx sitting at the base of what was called the Twin Peaks. If you look back here at the top, wow, that's really irritating that it keeps doing that. If you look at the top on the Twin Peak here, you can kind of see row houses here. Again, blocky structures. There's even a little road, it looks like it goes up there. These are condos, and this is a sphinx. And if you look at the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter images of this area, the Sphinx just doesn't exist. It's just not. There's a trench there and nothing else. But you know, am I crazy, or can you see the little head right there, and the little paws coming out the front? God, this is really irritating to do it this way. And then there's some other stuff over here, but it's centered right between the two Twin Peaks. There's one peak here, one peak there. They're very pyramidal. They both have condos on them, and then there looks like a Sphinx, as if it was guarding it. It's kind of irritating to me that John Brandenburg got to do this on the Mars episode on Ancient Aliens last year, but it was my stuff. Here's another example, just kind of a comparison from the same angle. Sphinx pyramid, Sphinx pyramid, Sphinx pyramid, Sphinx pyramid. Now, I don't know what this stuff is. Over here, it looks blocky. It looks like it might be part of an enclosure that was once there and it's not there anymore. So there's also other stuff on Mars. Like here's a dome with, see all these arches coming up? Yeah, that's how you would get into it. I don't know. Looks like an amphitheater or something, a little cover on it. And it's partially buried. I mean, you've got debris that's come in here and buried this other side of it, but
architectural buttresses.
yeah, I mean, that's not natural. I don't know what that to say about it, except it's not natural. This is a really cool one that they put out on, Malin put out. You see that thing with the hole in it there? And then if you look, you can actually see that there's the shadow here. There's a little light here. You can actually walk up the stairs here, and I guess pick up your helicopter ride or something. I don't know what that would be. But, you know, again, these things just jut out at you when you start looking at pictures. This is the infamous or famous Face on Mars. And people have accused me. There's actually a review on Amazon that says that there are no pictures from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter that I've ever studied or put in any of my books. Well, here's this one. This was in Ancient Aliens on Mars. But again, this is from the nose area of the face. And again, you can just see this wall that comes down, and then it angles over, and it comes down, and it angles over, and it comes down, and it angles over. And there's a bunch of other square stuff. This is all eroded and ruined, but these are all walls. They're all at 90 degrees to each other. These are cells. These are like little rooms for whoever used to live on this thing, or in this thing. Here's some other stuff. This one, again, if you look at the patterns, hopefully you can, oh, that's really, come on. There we go. If you look at this area here, it's kind of, see that big square? That's about as big as a sports stadium, like a football stadium. And you see how that's all square and connected? Those are all walls. Okay, so in the book, I start with some stuff. One of the things I wanted to focus on a little bit was the face on Mars. These are a bunch of different pictures of the face on Mars. NASA says it has zero scientific interest in this object, okay? The very first image is the one at the top. It was taken by the Viking orbiter in 1976. And as that data was developed, you got this, and then this is the same picture, these two. This is the same picture as the first one, but it's been enhanced and improved. There was a second picture that was eventually found. That over there is like a data error that's not really on the face, but this was the Mars Odyssey Themis image, which is about 20 meters per pixel. This one's about 30 meters per pixel, the original, so in other words, it's quite a bit better. This is Mars Express, color image of the face on Mars, and then this is Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. And what I've always noticed is that the only ones that are directly overhead are the original Viking images and the European Space Agency images. Those are the best images. The Themis one is pretty good, the one from Mars Odyssey. But NASA has taken at least 35 pictures of the face on Mars. It's been photographed more than any other object on the planet Mars from any of the probes, and they say they have zero interest in it. But they're sure spending a lot of resources to take pictures of it. Yeah?
Well, out of the images that you're showing, what is the most recent? What year approximately?
Well, the most recent would be the MRO image, which is the one on the right, this bottom right one. And it's the most highly detailed, but there's different tricks that they do. What I've found, what I'm going to talk about in here, is that as you go through this, I found that each one of these cameras, they're all different. They all have different hardware, they have different software, and you see different things in different images. And part of the reason for that is just the way the camera processes the data, because you're looking at some subtle details that are kind of partially buried or a little bit buried. And it's funny because in some of the images, you see things like nostrils. I'll show you those later in the nose. And then they disappear in other images, but then it comes back in another image. So it's like, again, it's all a question of it's like looking at this thing through a screen door or something. And as the light changes and as the data is processed differently, what you end up seeing is the details come out and then they go away and they come out.
Well, what I found
Part of that is also that NASA just takes an airbrush and erases stuff.
The reason why I asked about the years, because I think in the last couple of years, on mainstream news, they were reporting that, that face is gone.
Yeah, they're full of shit, I think is the right word. Okay, so this next one is actually a combination. This is color combination, black and white on the left or grayscale on the left. On the left is one of the Mars Global Surveyor images, which is pretty good. On the right is Mars Odyssey Themis, thermal infrared image of the face on Mars. And why this is important is that, again, I think it's unfortunate that we've lost a little detail and contrast here, but if you look here, this image on the right was taken at 4:30 in the morning Martian time, pre-dawn. Like, in the morning when you just begin to see the light outside. So there's almost no light. And yet this thing was so reflective that it basically blotted out the imager in the thermal infrared. And what that means is that this stuff on the right-hand side, and again, you just can't, can you see it? I don't know, yeah, I can see this sort of geometric paneling stuff here on the right, over here? Yeah. That stuff is all not aligned with the camera scans. In other words, you're not getting artifacts from the camera scanning. It is actually on the face on Mars. It's not visible in the visible light images, but in the thermal infrared, you see these geometric panels, and they are aligned with the north-south of the face structure itself, not with the north-south of the image scan. And the fact that it's that reflective, there's only one thing it could be. That has to be metal. It has to be made of metallic material. It is not rock. So if somebody tries to tell you the face on Mars is a pile of rocks, you simply say, oh, well, what about the thermal infrared images where it came back basically reflecting and retaining heat like metal? Here's the Themis image, which is a moderate resolution. You can kind of see hints of the details on it. The thing about the face that I think is most interesting and always been compelling to me is that if you look at the sides of it, you got a straight parallel line here. I mean, there's some collapse stuff going on here, but you've got basically a parallel line and a parallel line. You've got a radius arc up here and a radius arc at the bottom. And they're the same. Those two arcs are the same. Those two parallel lines are the same, hundreds of meters parallel to themselves. This beveled platform that you see, kind of all the way around it, there's just simply nothing like that in nature anywhere on the earth. And people say, oh, well, it looks like it's a table mountain. Okay, show me a table mountain that has just that degree of symmetry in just any aspect of it. And there is none. Nature doesn't work like this. So beyond that, there's stuff like there's an eyeball area here. This is where the nose is. This is where the mouth was. And there are two eye sockets. They're a little bit different. It looks like there's some collapse over here on the right. But what's interesting about it is that this image also is not perfectly aligned. In other words, they have to orthographically correct this, so it ends up really kind of distorting what the face looks like. This is the pyramid I spoke of earlier. This is the D&M pyramid. It has two axes of symmetry, one going this way and has this pentagonal shape to it, and then another one coming up with this, aligning with this sort of tail extension that's on the thing. It's on a platform. It's 1.5 miles high. It's a couple miles wide. I really would like them to see the pictures, okay? So could we just stick with that? I mean, I am good looking, but not that great. So this is two pictures of the D&M. There's been some 3D stuff done. Here's the original Themis thermal infrared image that I talked about. This is just the whole thing. This is what they got at 4:30 in the morning when there shouldn't be enough light to see anything, yet this thing is massively reflective. In fact, it's so reflective that, like I said, it basically blotted out the camera. And what you have to do is you have to process this and enhance it and turn the volume down on the light, really darken the image before you see the detail come out. Here is what it looks like, again, with the detail out. You can see a little bit better the paneling stuff that I'm talking about on the right-hand side. So I got really interested in that. What could I find on there that hadn't been found before? And on the left, you see a visible light image from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. On the right, you see the Themis thermal infrared. So I need to actually see this myself with glasses on. So, God, can you really see that from far back? Probably can't. So what I want to talk about is this area right here. And what you see is, if you see, there's like lines going this way, vertical, lines going this way. These are all ribs. These are structural pieces. This looks like it's about the same size as a sports arena. And you notice, you see, can you really, yeah, you see this stuff right here? Yeah. Squares, angles, lines. This is a hollow area that has collapsed upon itself. This area right here was the roof. This is all the support structure around the side of it. And notice, again, the pattern here, these lines there, right there. See how they all match up? And this is at a resolution, like I said, good enough to basically be able to, well, not read the time off your wristwatch, but see that you have a wristwatch on. Yeah? And this is not as clear as it should be. And it's like you get the images, you look at the camera's capabilities, less than a half meter per pixel. That's enough to be able to see at least people walking around, but yet the detail's not really there. So, but what I want you guys to pay attention to is, again, just this pattern of around the outside. This is all the support structure, girders, things like that. You notice it has a very geometric pattern. And then in the middle is the roof of the sports stadium, and it just collapsed like this sports arena did in New Jersey years ago. I think it was New Jersey. And again, notice around the outside you have this stuff here that's sort of all these cross members and squared stuff, and that's all the support structure that was supposed to hold that roof up, and then it got too heavy and it just caved in. And if you look at them side by side or top to bottom, it's basically exactly the same thing. Okay, and hopefully you can see that. I look at it. I mean, but I grew up a mechanical engineer, so I just see things the way I see them, and I'm like, okay, there's structure right there. So they've also taken some more pictures. This is actually a color version of the same area that they released. And the more you work with this stuff, the more stuff you see. You just see all, and right above this collapsed area, and these, again, are comparable in size. This is on the face on Mars, near the nose, and it's about the size of a sports arena. So a lot of people could live there, even if they were 8 or 10 or, like Michael Tellinger was telling us, 25 feet tall. I couldn't believe how big some of, do you see some of those skeletal things? So these were huge structures that have now collapsed and are in ruin on the face itself. Here's a close-up of that color one. It's, again, it's color, and it's not nearly as clear as the black and white or the grayscale. But you can see, again, the same structural stuff around the outside of this. And NASA just acts like that doesn't exist. Here's another close-up of the area, and you look at the area above it, and you can just see that there is this sort of geometric pattern. There's a nice girder right there. But what's weird about it is that, again, in the one image of this same area, we didn't see that spar. And now in this image, you can see it. So why is it that we can see it in one image and not see it in the other? There's details that get dropped out. Probably because somebody decided that it would be a little bit too revealing to let that out. So anyway, the next thing I did in the book is that was just reviewing stuff that was in the first Ancient Aliens on Mars book. And after that, what I wanted to do is go in and start looking at some of these other myths and mysteries and legends that have been out there about Mars. One of them is about the moon Phobos. Phobos has 2 moons. They are simply asteroids that are orbiting around the equator, which is a really unlikely circumstance in the first place to have occurred naturally. But one of them that's always been very interesting to people is Phobos. Now, again, we've kind of lost the definition here, but this is a color photograph taken by the Russian probe Phobos 2. It's a little confusing, but there was a Phobos 1 and a Phobos 2. Phobos 1 didn't make it because the Russians, had some issues. Phobos 2 made it. But if you look at this thing, you look at Phobos itself, and it has this unusual sort of patterning on it, which I'll show you in a close-up here. This is a close-up of that. And again, you can see the cross-hatching. That's completely unnatural. There's no reason why an asteroid would look like that. And if you look at the comet that they just recently went to and took pictures of, I forget the name of it, and some of the other asteroids, none of them have this sort of pattern on them, and they shouldn't, because that is all an indication of like a structural mesh that's been built up. Now, what could happen then is that you could have dirt and things and dust accumulate on the outside, but there's a lot of reason to think that Phobos is actually hollow. When the Russians went there, they did some analysis of the mass, and they discovered that there were these big voids inside of Phobos, rooms that were about 200 feet across, which is a pretty good size. It's bigger than this, 200 square feet across. So there was a whole bunch of rooms inside of it. It seems to be hollow. It has this cross-hatching pattern. Here's more detail of the cross-hatching pattern. And of course, there are meteor impacts and things like that. But again, you can see it coming straight up and coming across. And as you get into it, you again see that there's these tracks, and these are all, I think these are all structural ribs underneath this thing, which are sort of the basic mesh that's holding it together. Now, Phobos also has something else really unusual on it. It has a monolith. This is something that Buzz Aldrin started talking about in 2009. There's a monolith on Phobos, and when they first took the pictures, it kind of looked like a boulder with a shadow that it was casting. But then they went back with Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has the best camera out there. And when they took the picture, it actually looks like the monolith from 2001, okay? So again, anything like that, rectangular, perfect form, sticky, it doesn't look like somebody just buried it right there. Somebody was trying to tell us, hey, look here, there's something cool to find. So this is something that the Canadians have talked about. Now we're dependent on the Canadians to go do this for you. They can't even play football right. We're going to send them up to this. But they're talking about landing a lander here and going up to this, and NASA is going out of their way to discourage them. Like they had money appropriated for it, and all of a sudden the money got pulled. There's rumors there was pressure from our government not to go there. But this thing is something that Buzz has been talking about, and these better pictures show you that it is just a big white reflective monolith on the surface of Phobos. So there's a lot of really weird stuff about Phobos. Now, one of the things that Phobos 2 did was they took thermal infrared images of the surface of Mars. And what you can get with thermal infrared that you can't get with visible light is you can get a little bit of ground penetration. You can see what's under the ground. And one of the things that they photographed was this area right up here, which is in an area called Hydaspes Chaos. And as at the time when they took the pictures, the Russians came out, and there's a close-up of it. Whoops. The Russians came out, and they said, well, this looks like a city. It's as big as Los Angeles. It's built like Los Angeles. It's got all these cross streets and everything, and we think that this is artificial. And they had a whole program set up where they were going to go to England, and they were going to talk about this There was actually a press conference in Russia where they said, we're pretty sure that this is an artificial city on the surface of Mars. And it was broadcast on TV, it was broadcast in the West. This is 1989, and they actually were going to go to England, and it was all arranged by a guy named, here's them showing some of the pictures at their press conference. And it was all arranged by this Dr. John Becklake, who's a very sober, solid guy. He was working for the London Science Museum. And the Russian scientists were going to come out and have a press conference here in the West where we could actually have Western press there where they were going to say the same thing. At the last minute, the Russians did not let them come. This is still the Soviet Union. So Becklake ended up doing it on his own. In front of these pictures, he came out and he said, yeah, this is what they told me. They think it's artificial. He had all these displays ready to go. And his career was over at that point because it was broadcast in England on Channel 4. So there was a lot of controversy around this. Here's sort of an enhanced version of what was shown on television. It's the best I can do. Some of this is artifacting, but you get the general right-angle pattern, that there is some sort of cityscape down there that they took photos of. Well, I was lucky enough to obtain the actual Phobos 2 images from a Russian source a few years ago, and I worked with it. And the one on the left is the version I did. The one on the right is the version that was broadcast on TV. But you can see that there is this regular repeating rectangular pattern, which generally indicates civilization. Carl Sagan says the way that you recognize intelligence is in the geometric regularity of its constructions. And that's what we're